Oh, all right.
Okay, let me come back to this.
Oh, my water. Silence this too, just so I only have the questions and I'm not getting bothered by people.
All right.
All right. So, the first thing.
You're already doing whatever you're recording?
Yeah, I'm just gonna kind of start.
Sure.
So the first thing I'm gonna ask you is kind of basic information, like what branch did you serve in? For example, the Marine Corps.
Yes, I was United States Marine Corps.
Yes, United States Marine Corps. And when did you join it?
I guess technically I joined it in August of 1985. I had an opportunity for an ROTC scholarship to go to college, and I accepted that, so I was a midshipman for 4 years while I was in college. And so that meant I was a Navy midshipman, and I had to wear a Navy uniform, and we had classes every semester, one class per semester. Sometimes there were fitness requirements, there were uniform requirements, and there was a requirement every summer to do something with the military. But technically during that time, it's called ROTC is Reserve Officer Training Corps. I think it's Corps. So you're technically in the reserves, but I actually became active duty in January of 1990.
Okay. Now, where'd you go to college at?
Penn State.
Penn State, that's right. Okay. The next thing I want to ask is, why did you join the military?
Well, my dad was a Marine, and he was very proud of the years he served as a Marine. And so I had that influence was pretty strong for me. But then another thing was right around the time I was getting ready to graduate high school, Westinghouse in Western Pennsylvania was a huge employer, and they crashed. And so my dad was a Westinghouse employee. So now there was a concern, and my parents probably would say there wasn't a concern, but it was one from my end of how do we pay for college? So this was a way to pay for college, have a job immediately after college, which is daunting for a guy coming out, and be a Marine. So there was the, so it seemed like a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Now, let's see. Sorry about that.
Nope.
So I guess, kind of one of the main reasons was kind of the economic pressure, I guess.
That was part of it.
And your dad.
Yeah, and the wanting to be a Marine. And then a big thing with coming in as a Marine Corps officer, and I'm sure it's across the services, is immediately you're going to have leadership responsibility. So, my first unit I knew would be somewhere 30 to 40 people that I was in charge of. So you get management experience right off the bat.
Now, I also want to ask, when you first joined in, what was your role? Like, for example, your MOS and your unit.
So I was a combat engineer. The first year in the Marine Corps is pretty much consumed by classes. So I went to the basic school. That's 6 months of running around the woods, learning infantry tactics and learning different things the Marine Corps does. And then you pick an MOS, and I picked combat engineering. So then I went to combat engineer school, which was down here at Camp Lejeune. And when I graduated from there, by the way, at the end of the basic school is when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait. So I knew that we were going to war. So after I graduated engineer school, then I went straight to California to be part of 1st Combat Engineer Battalion. And those are the guys that breach landmines and they breach obstacles and they help you get to the enemy. That's kind of the combat engineer role to a simplified extent. And so I went straight up to 1st Combat Engineers at Camp Pendleton.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. So is that would, for example, EOD be considered combat engineers?
There are some EOD in there, but no, that's a different thing. Think about that. They're explosive ordnance disposal.
Yeah.
So they might have bombs that are hung up on aircraft, or they find a roadside bomb that needs to be diffused or blown in place. Those guys are, they are really highly trained, and so they go out there and they'll diffuse bombs, they'll blow them in place. The combat engineers, their mission is mobility, so keep the unit moving. It could be crossing a gap, it could be getting through this minefield, It could be breaching obstacles that are, that are blocking you from getting places. Mobility, counter mobility, you set up those things to keep the enemy away from you. Survivability, that's like, bunkers and sandbags and all these things designed to protect the force. And then there's some other general engineering stuff that's build roads and runways and electrical power and things like that. But the combat engineer side is about the mobility, counter mobility, and survivability.
Yeah. So making it easier for you guys to get around, make it harder for the enemy to get around.
Exactly. Yeah.
That makes sense. Hold on. Pardon me for a sec. I'm just going to make it so my questions and notes don't disappear on me.
Sure.
So let's see if I'll walk the network. Oh. Okay, there we go. So kind of going backtracking to why I joined, like how did your family and immediate friends react to you joining?
Oh, they were overwhelmingly supportive.
Oh,
yeah, there was no pushback because my dad had military experience.
Yeah.
I've spoken with friends recently. One of my friends, her son just graduated from the Naval Academy, and when he was interested in that, she was super afraid. Everyone thinks that when you go into the military that it's nothing but bullets flying around and people dying. It's a heck of a lot more than that. It's that.
Yeah.
But that might represent 1% of an entire career, if any.
Exactly. Like even I know that most of the military's support roles.
Well, a lot of them, sure. A lot of them are. I mean, and you can be in the rear areas and certainly be exposed to danger and get crushed. It happens all the time. But yeah.
Now, I also want to ask.
But to answer your question, because my dad was a Marine, there was no sort of fear or concern. My mom probably had some concern, I guess, especially when Desert Storm came. That's when Saddam Hussein and all that.
Yeah.
We're talking 1990, 1991.
Yeah, I didn't know if you were. Way Flores said you joined around '89, so I didn't know if you were in Panama or any of that either.
I was not in Panama, so I ended up on 5 combat deployments. So once to Desert Storm, once to Somalia. Somalia is like 1993, 94. Once to the Philippines. This is in 2002, right after 9/11, in a real small island. There was some counterinsurgency operations, and then twice in Afghanistan. So,
okay.
Yeah.
You just told me, I didn't know we were still doing counterinsurgency in the Philippines. I know that the Filipinos were.
Oh yeah.
The class I'm recording this for, we were learning how they were doing that in 1898.
Oh yeah, so amazing!
It's crazy how they're still doing it.
I'm trying to think of the guy's name. The very famous Army general that was down there.
I think was it Pershing?
It was, yeah. Blackjack Pershing. Yeah, that's right.
He said he loved. I think they were called the Moros. I don't remember their name.
Yeah. Oh yeah. You're right.
He loved fighting.
And there are there's different organizations that were down there fighting when I was down there, and one of them was, I think it was the Moro Islamic Front or something like that. But we were fighting or helping. So we were doing foreign internal defense, if you're familiar with that. So I was in support of special operations forces that were comprised of United States Army, Navy, Marine Corps. There were Air Force. In fact, the general that was in charge of this force, called JTF, Joint Task Force 510, they were working side by side with the Filipino Army, Navy, and Marine Corps, fighting against the Abu Sayyaf, which was an Islamic, militant organization on the island of Basilan.
Yeah.
So if you look at the Philippines, the big island up north is, holy cow, I'm going to blank here for a second. We got the 2 big islands.
Where like Manila is. And all the big
cities. So the 2 big islands. Oh my goodness. I can't believe I'm blanking. Hold on a second. Let me take a look here. But the north is primarily Christian. And the south is primarily Muslim. And while there are probably thousands of islands, the top one is Luzon, primarily
Yeah,
Catholic.
that's what I was heard.
The one at the bottom is Mindanao, and I was at a little place called. We were based out of Zamboanga.
I can see that.
And that's where I was, Isabella City, on the island of Basilan.
Mm.
And we had Marines. I mean, I had Seabees. We had everybody there, but we were spread all over that island. But we were doing foreign internal defense training, working side by side and assisting the Filipino Army and Marine Corps fighting against these Abu Sayyaf.
Mm.
So, yeah, interesting time.
Yeah, that's very interesting. He just, for context, Mr. Tony, he just showed me maps of where he was in the Philippines. I'll put that up on a document later.
Yeah.
So, kind of going back, so I want to ask you about your first deployment, which was Desert Storm. And I kind of wanted to ask you, did you face combat in Desert Storm?
So for Desert Storm, almost all of the U.S. forces were already there by the time I got to my unit in January of 91. And essentially it was like, hey, sorry, everybody, the team has already gone. You stay home.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought we were staying home. And within probably 2 weeks, they said, no, you're going. You're going to be part of the Combat Replacement Regiment, and you're going to be part of Combat Replacement Company 9. So we went to 29 Palms and trained, and it was a big hodgepodge of literally combat replacements. They changed the name because of what the original name was, Casualty Replacement Company.
Jeez.
That was the real name. And then they changed it to Combat Replacements. So we went and trained. We had infantry, we had logistics, truck drivers, we had engineers, everything. And we ended up deploying to Saudi Arabia. And I'm going to forget the name of the city that's there, but it's just south, maybe 80 miles from the Kuwait border. And they were giving us constant briefs. And they were saying, hey, these certain MOSs, within the first couple of days of the ground offensive, you'll be gone. You're heading north. Because the casualty projections were so high. And so
I've heard that.
They were saying infantry was obviously one of them. Tanks, infantry, combat engineers are like, listen, when the ground war starts, you won't be here more than a week. It's highly unlikely. You'll be shipped up to the front. And so we were just ready for that. And fortunately, that wasn't what happened.
Yeah.
I mean, we blew right through them. And so I ended up, the only combat thing that happened was I was at an oil camp. I think it was Camp 5 or something like that. They've got these oil camps out there. And the one next to us got hit by a Scud missile, or landed right outside.
Yeah.
And so shook the earth and everything. But we were far enough away that, and even they were too. Nobody really. I don't think anybody got hurt in that, but it rocked the land where we were, and that was essentially the entire bit of combat that I saw there. So okay, even the guys that were up north, well, actually they saw a lot of pretty bad stuff, but they did well. They brought most people home. Turns out Combat Engineer Battalion had a guy, and I can't believe I'm blanking on his name right now because it stuck with me for years and years and years, that had been killed as they were getting ready to go. He got run over by a tank. And one of the first sergeants, when I got to the unit, he was talking about Lance Corporal gentleman, I can't remember his name. And I said, wait a minute, Lance Corporal so-and-so, do you mean, Waldron? Lance Corporal Waldron. And I said, well, do you mean Jim Waldron? He said, yeah, his name's James Waldron. I went to high school with the guy.
Oh, jeez.
I mean, he, like my class, and he enlisted in the Marine Corps a couple of years after, going to college. Yeah. And he was in that unit and would have been in the unit with me. Had I joined the unit 2 months prior, he'd have been in the unit with me. As it turns out, he was, had been killed over there.
I'm sorry to hear that. Now, I kind of wanted to, well, I guess it doesn't make sense now, but I was going to ask you if you had seen a lot of combat. It doesn't really work here. If you had seen a lot of combat in Desert Storm.
I did not in Desert Storm. When I was in I was off the coast, or off the port, I should say, of Singapore. I was on a ship for Black Hawk Down. Remember when that happened?
Yeah.
Okay. So we had just gone to Okinawa and we went to Hong Kong. We were just about to get off ship and go to Singapore to go visit the port. We were on our way to Perth, Australia, and it was the different stops we are going to make along the way. I was on the ship when Black Hawk Down happened, and so essentially, hey, nobody's going to shore. We packed up, and within the next, I'd say 24 hours, we were gone, and we went to the coast of Africa and sat off the coast of Somalia for essentially 4 months. Jeez. And we'd go in, like the very first time I went in there, we went in at night. We went with, I want to say it was the Italians. I think that's who we joined up with. No, I take it back. It might have been the Nigerians, but it was in an Italian part of Mogadishu, which I learned, I didn't know at the time, what used to be, Somalia was an Italian colony.
It was an Italian colony.
And so that's why everything, it was really interesting. But we're driving through this town just a few weeks, probably 2 weeks after Black Hawk Down went. We're driving through the middle of the city. Everybody is armed. All the buildings are painted in Italian motif. There's not a single window or roof on any building you can see. I mean, all of that had been stripped off and used for whatever. And we're just going through, and I'm just waiting to see, what happens next.
Yeah.
And for that entire time, multiple trips in and around Mogadishu, Somalia, nothing really happened. But the U.S. came in with force after that happened. And so while there were periodic, gunfire exchanges, like they'll call them a TIC, troops in contact.
Oh,
TIC, troop in contact, troops in contact. Well, there are periodic things like that and lots of sniper action. Because what they did was they said anything that was considered a crew-served weapon. So if it's bigger than you, meaning it's more than one man
say
thing.
A mortar or a heavy machine gun?
A mortar, heavy, 50 caliber machine gun. Even like what used to be M260, then became M240, which would be a 7.62 millimeter machine gun. Even that, which would be considered a medium machine gun, those are crew served. You got a guy with perhaps a tripod, a guy with ammunition, whatever. It takes more than one person to man and support that. They call crew served weapon. And rockets are like that too. What was running all over Mogadishu were these things, they call them technicals. And it was a pickup truck with a big sort of mount, and these guys would drive around these technicals with 50, the equivalent of our 50 cal, but it's more of a Russian version.
Is it called a Dishka?
That's it. Yeah, as a matter of fact, good job. I'm forgetting some of this stuff, but essentially, if you were associated with a crew-served weapon and you were out there and you were not in uniform, you were live game. And not just Americans, because this was a UN mission.
Yeah.
But they were sniping them and taking them out. Like, okay, we see what you did, and that's we know who you work for, and that was it. They were starting to take people out.
Yeah. So, Now, I want to ask, when you first saw combat, how did you feel? Were you scared, anxious, excited?
So I got pretty. I was pretty fortunate. The very few times that live fire took place around me, nobody got hurt. Probably one of the ones that was the oddest was we were in the Philippines and driving through the middle of the jungle, and a shot kicked up in front of the vehicle. And so we immediately took cover. We started hearing on the radio, we were monitoring what's going on, and we had a 2-man sniper team up on the ridgeline above us. And so we were getting out. Once we were trying to make sure everyone was safe, that's the biggest thing, is where can you get cover and keep everyone safe? And then once you're out of the kill zone, essentially, now how do you either yourself with your force or via reinforcements go and attack the enemy to eliminate the threat? We never even saw the threat on that particular day. And so, it was the oddest thing, because that whole time we were there was a photo came out in the newspaper, and it was me on the hood of a Humvee with a map, and I was looking at this, and I was on the radio talking, and I don't know who took that picture. So my point is, whoever took that picture, if he had been, and he might have, if he or she had been, the enemy, it could have been any one of us in a heartbeat. We did not spot that guy, whoever it was. So anyway, those two snipers, they ended up, getting out. It was just we could hear the activity, we could talk, we could hear what's going on, and they did this thing. They call it an Australian peel. It's one of these things, but it's a two-man team. So one's laying down suppressive fire, the other's backing out. Then he's laying down suppressive fire, this guy's backing out. And we were able to extract them with I think they went in with a helicopter and picked those guys out of the top of the mountain. But so that was really the close app. And then, so that was probably that was the first time. Because I really didn't see anything in Somalia. I didn't see anything in Desert Storm. And then the closest thing probably in 2 tours of Afghanistan was I was working with the Afghan commandos. We were at a place called Task Force Moorhead. And that compound was about an hour drive south of Kabul. And periodically the higher headquarters would want us to come up to Kabul, for different meetings or whatever. And so we had to vary our route all the time, so you weren't predictable, and you weren't, as much as you could keep the enemy guessing. But coming through there, the day I arrived, they had a lot of this. There was a lot of vehicle-borne IEDs, and so they would come up to a vehicle, and we were not in anything except what equates to like a Toyota 4Runner.
Yeah.
Except they were up armored. The glass was probably 5 inches thick, and they were super heavy. But when they hit you with a vehicle-borne IED, a lot of people got hurt very fast. And the way we were operating, and it's totally not the way the Marine Corps operates, but it was the way that ISAF, International Security Assistance Force in NATO, was operating. I shouldn't say NATO, but certainly the way our forces was operating was, there were times when you were alone and unafraid.
Yeah.
I mean, there was normally you're moving from point A to point B. There are checkpoints along the way. There's battle space. There's battle space owners. You're coordinating with, hey, Nolan, I'm passing through your neighborhood.
Yeah.
If I need help, I'm going to give you a call. And so your guys know I'm coming through. Make sure they don't shoot me either.
Yeah.
Then you're
exactly.
Like, hey, Nolan, I'm leaving your neighborhood. Now I'm going to Jimmy's neighborhood. Jimmy, this is me. That's kind of the way it is. And in the meantime, you're also calling like your higher headquarters, and they're monitoring your movement. I'm at checkpoint A, B, C. That is not how it was.
Yeah.
And so I was shocked the first day that we went, and it was actually in one vehicle. You never travel in one vehicle. You never travel without some form of QRF, quick reaction force, some form of consistent and constant communication throughout the route. None of that existed. So there were times when some defensive driving avoided collisions with other cars that maybe weren't even VBIEDs, and probably weren't, but they're designed to stop you.
Yeah.
Because they get you stopped.
Yeah.
Now you're in the middle of nowhere with like 4 guys, and you're surrounded. Well, the strangest incident happened in a little town to the east of where I was. The town I was in was called Rishkhor. Rishkhor, I think. But just to the east of that was a town that was the hometown. I'll think of the guy's name, but he was a major player. Hekmatyar was his name, and there was a HIG group. HIG was this one, bad group in town. Well, we got stuck in that town, and there's 2 vehicles. There's 8 of us, and we're probably a mile and a half from our base camp, which was filled with special forces, Army Special Forces guys. And I know they're ready at a moment's call to come out there and see what's going on. I was the only Marine during that tour. Had a bunch of really solid Army guys, couple Air Force, no Navy, didn't have any Navy. and a whole bunch of Afghan forces,
Yeah.
to include Afghan civilians who were contractors who secured our 6-kilometer compound. Anyway, I had to make the call to divide our forces. And I stayed in the town because I couldn't very well, like, hey, I'll come back and get you guys. You know, I was in charge. You can't do that.
Yeah, you can't do that.
So I stayed with the 4, and we essentially went down each avenue of approach to kind of keep people away the best we could. You know, so you're going to be able to see them coming. And we were there for probably an hour and a half, just 4 of us. We couldn't get a hold of the SF guys. So we had to send a vehicle to drive to go get those guys. And they came in hot, you know, with up armored Humvees and everything. But there was a time I lost a guy, Army Major, and I'm like, hey, where's Major G? Where's Major G? And I was like, I don't know where he is. He was right over there. And so I go walking down this road, and there is a huge crowd. I'm like, this is not good. And I'm the only guy. There's 2 people behind me, and they're securing the vehicle. There's Major G who's missing, and here I come walking. There's this big crowd, and I can hear a lot of commotion. So I'm already assuming the very worst. So I come up there and I yell, you know, Major G, and I hear his voice. And I come up, and the crowd opens, and he's in the middle of this crowd playing with the kids. And anytime, and I saw this in the Philippines, I saw it in Somalia, and I saw it in Afghanistan. If you see, typically, I'm not being sexist by any stretch, but if you see women and children around, you're in a fairly safe environment, because they don't want to have kids and their wives and sisters, whatever, killed either. It's when you go through a town that's usually very lively, and I've had this happen numerous times, and there's nobody on the streets, but you'll see a couple guys, and then they're making phone calls. That's when you start, you know, you get on alert. You start telling everybody, listen, watch out, be aware, you know, because they could be setting up a complex ambush. Complex means they'll do an obstacle, stops you in place, boom, and then they're set up in that area to start firing at you. And sometimes they'll even set it up so it's secondary, so when more forces come in to help you, then they'll hit another charge and get an opportunity to take out more. So all of that to say, so had a couple of those small incidents, little small arms fire things that came in and around me. Rocket fire in Afghanistan up there at, it's called Delaram. We were building an airstrip on this place, and that compound would take rocket fire probably once a week, maybe twice a week, and you know, it would shake, or you'd get the alarm that was coming in. But I've always been very fortunate, and I'm glad, because I never did any exchange, never returned gunfire, never had to, and that's great, because when that's happening, your fellow Marines are getting, you know, are in harm's way as well. Just never had to. So out of 5 combat deployments, 29 years of being a Marine, just never happened for me. But you always think about, your people first. It's instinctive, or maybe it's trained into you, or whatever. You're trying to find out, make sure is everyone square? Is everyone accounted for? Is everybody in some form of cover? And then once you got your bearings, then okay, how do we suppress what's going on and eliminate it, whether it's by reinforcements or your own forces maneuvering? That's what you're thinking of, until you realize, you know, in my cases, okay, I don't have an existing threat. So it might have been a pot shot. It might have been a rocket. They would do this in Afghanistan all the time. They would set up rockets on rocks. They're really not accurate. And they would fire the rocket and take off. Because they know they'd have some counter battery fire. We had the ability to that's where it came from. We could return fire very quickly.
Exactly.
So they were not too keen on sticking around. They'd take a shot and roll. You know, kind of, I call it harassing fire, but people do get killed by harassing fire.
So really, with the exception, I would say, of the Scud missiles and Desert Storm, you were facing pretty much insurgents the whole time. You weren't facing a conventional force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the only conventional force was when I was in Desert Storm.
Yeah.
Every other combat deployment was against insurgency operations. And I was in 2002 when I was in the Philippines. It was because I was in Okinawa. And at that time, Okinawa, if you were sitting at Okinawa, your dance card was full. You were either focused on China, Korea, North Korea.
Yeah.
So you were not going all the way around the world to go to Iraq or Afghanistan.
Yeah.
You got, no, you're here for this. And so we didn't go anywhere except stay in the Pacific Theater. Within probably 2 years later, that was out the door, and they were using every unit they could find to rotate in because you can only sustain a force for so long.
Yeah, exactly.
And you got to rotate them out and get new, fresh, fresh forces in there. So
now, when you went on deployments, typically, how long were those? How long would you be?
All of mine, except the first one, was pretty short. It was about first one, Desert Storm, was only about 3 months. The Philippines was about 5 months, and the rest were all 7 months. Yeah. And it's typically only 6 months. But the one in Somalia, we got extended, so that became 7 months. The first one in Afghanistan, I was an augment. I was telling you, I was the only Marine. I was in charge of this small task force. We had about 1,000 people.
Yeah.
So I had the 100-ish security force, which was contracted. I had about an 85-man company of Afghan commandos. So they were the training cadre, the CTC, Commando Training Cadre. We had, this was all part of the same force. We had a Special Forces B team and A team. So you'll hear it ODB, Operational Detachment B, and that's led by a major. And then an A team is 12 folks, and that's typically a captain. I don't think we had any lieutenants. I think it was a captain. That was the A team, and so they did the main training. The B team had not just these guys, but other guys around working with forces. We had about 40-man contracted training team. There were a bunch of retired Army guys, really sharp, colonels, sergeants major, etc. And then you'd get and then my team was only about 12 people. And then you'd get, I think it was about 700. You'd get an influx of about 700 students to become commandos, and that's who we were training. But I'm trying to remember what your question was and what I was going down here. Hold on. You said,
jeez, what did I say? I was just asking how long your deployments were.
Oh, yeah. Sorry. So that one, I was a replacement for an Army colonel. I was a Marine lieutenant colonel at the time. And anyway, I was getting ready to leave, and they didn't have a replacement. And I was calling the Marine Corps saying, listen, this is the best gig you can think of. It is fantastic. We own our own compound. It's great. I said, send someone soon. Well, Marine Corps backfilled me with a major. I had already replaced an Army colonel. Yeah. So they were already saying, well, we're not gonna have a major come in and be in charge of another major.
Yeah.
You know, that major that was the SF guy. And it was a supporting thing. I mean, he didn't work for me, but he worked in support of me, if that makes sense. We were working, and I worked in support of him too. I was the one in charge of getting him the soldiers. We did recruiting, uniforms, vehicles, weapons, ammunition. That was our job. And his job was to train, mentor, and take these guys on operations, together. So he was really the tactical guy. Mm-hmm. But they wouldn't replace me. So they said, hey, can you stay longer? And I was having a great time. So I said, yeah, I can stay longer. So that extended me to like 7 months. And then the Afghanistan gig ended up my next one. I was a Marine Wing Support Squadron. So engineers could do stuff on the infantry side. That was Combat Engineer Battalion. You can do stuff on the support logistics side. And that's what I did in the Philippines. I was building roads. The Seabees were installing wells that worked for us. We built bridges. We built buildings. We built different docks, for like bringing in gravel and everything. We were all about mobility. There, we built an airstrip. We actually revitalized the 1947 or 19. It was 44. It was in the 40s. C-47 airstrip. That's an old cargo plane.
Yeah.
And we brought in a C-130 to land on a 2,000-foot runway.
Yeah.
And but it was an Air Force C-130. Kind of a real special bird. But anyway, so you can do the direct combat side. You can do the logistics, build, buildings and roads and power and water production. We did a bunch of water production. Then you can do the air side, which was my last gig in combat, where we're building and operating and securing airfields. And so that's what I was doing there. And that just happened to be between the overlap between your previous unit and the next unit. You end up being about 7 months. So it was somewhere around March of 2010 to the end of September, October timeframe, 2010. So yeah. So mine were all 7 months. Army guys, God bless them. A lot of them are like 15-month gigs. When you are in a big unit, if you're part of a colonel or above level staff, those were always 13 months for the Marine Corps because they wanted continuity of the the command and control guys. So I'm glad I wasn't part of one of those staffs, or I'd be there for a long time.
Yeah. I kind of wanted to ask, those deployments, you were away from your family for a while. Was that difficult for you?
Yeah, it was. It's you get used to it. We didn't think much of it because, Laura kind of got used to it very, very quickly because I would first, just during my first training, you'd go to the field for 10 or 12 days. And then you get to your first unit. Now you're going to the field, meaning you're going out somewhere. It could be Fort Ord, California. I went there. It could be 29 Palms. It could be, wherever you can imagine. You're gonna move your troops and your equipment to a location to practice doing it. And even down here, I just moved my forces for 10 days down to Bogue Field. You take your stuff to the field, set it up, prove you can do it in a combat environment with no connection to facilities, because that's what we're supposed to do, expeditionary. So my point of that is all of these little, here's 2 weeks here, here's a month there. Oh, I'm going to such and such. That's 6 weeks away. I'd get sent to a school somewhere that might be 6 weeks. I don't think I've done any schools longer than that, except where they move you completely. So you kind of get used to being apart, and then you get on one of these deployments, and you miss your family. They adjust without you. They warn you right up front. They're telling you and your family, you guys will be different people when you come home. And like Laura, she got used to running the entire place and did it great. Well, I come home after my first deployment, and I'm used to issuing orders. And Marines are good. They I'm not being smart about it, but to include whatever echelon you're at, whether you're a young PFC or a lieutenant colonel, we're used to receiving orders, and you go do them. It's not quite instant obedience to orders, but you're executing. There's no, you've received an order, go do it. And so what ends up happening is you got someone staying home. They've adjusted. They now run the entire household, and now you're coming home. You're used to issuing orders, and having it done. You don't have to think twice about it, and so some conflict will happen.
Exactly.
And so, but so the one when I was the two where I was a lieutenant, young guy, I would say those were the hardest to adjust when you come home. The later ones, I was a major and then a lieutenant colonel for 2 different deployments. Those were easier. It's sort of like we kind of got it. You know what I mean? You learn to adjust.
Yeah. Now, this is kind of a follow-up question to that. Did those deployments after you had kids? I know Nick was born 97, 98.
Yeah, he's 98.
And Morgan was born in 2000. Did those become harder after you had kids?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, they definitely are harder. And then you talk to, like you don't think about it.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm not, and Laura should be probably mad at me.
Mhm.
You don't, during the day, you are constantly consumed with the mission of the day. And while I was in Philippines, and I was telling you, I didn't, I wasn't, or not in the Philippines, but I was in the in Afghanistan doing the MWSS mission, and I was not constantly under fire. I had a big group of military policemen up in this way out in the middle of nowhere, and they did periodically get under fire. And I was running convoys back and forth for a very short period at the front between two different air bases, and those convoys ended up getting hit with fire. So the point is, you're constantly focused on how to best execute this mission and keep your equipment and your Marines and everything safe. That you don't have that much time to think about the family.
Yeah. Yeah.
And as time went on, so early on, when I was in Somalia.
Yeah.
You had to go to the ship, and I got permission one time, but and you call your family, but it's like a special deal. Otherwise, you are disconnected. Think about it, 1993. There's no internet.
Exactly.
At least not for us. And so we were completely disconnected. You fast forward, and I think even in the Philippines, even though we were living in tents for 4 months, and then some wooden structures for a bit, we did have the ability, to communicate. So you're still doing emails. You can go back and forth. And then when I went to the Philippines, to Afghanistan, then you were into where you could Skype, and the maturity was getting better.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that does make it a little easier.
Yeah, so it makes it easier. So what happens is you connect with the family either by phone or Skype or whatever, and you immediately miss them, and you weren't focused on them before, but now you are.
And then you think about it for a few hours.
Days, whatever. Yeah, it ends up being a mixed bag. It's great talking to everybody, and then you feel like crap.
Yeah. Let's see, what kind of stuff did I have? I kind of wanted to ask, when you were deployed, did it kind of change your worldview when you went to these places like Somalia, Philippines, Afghanistan?
I think so. Yeah, I would say absolutely. What you see is, I'm thinking of so I'll just fill those places. And Saudi Arabia was a bit of an odd one because I was mostly with Americans the entire time.
Yeah.
But in Somalia, so if I said Somalia a minute ago, I meant Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, I was mostly with Americans on the continent. When I went to Somalia, though, now I'm working with other forces. I'm seeing, there's some really good ones, and there's some really immature. And I'm not saying like behavior-wise, like they are not good tacticians. Yeah. And they are, and wow, we got to really help them and be careful we don't rely on those forces as our primary means of support. Not all. There's some fantastic ones out there. But what you see is there's really a huge spectrum of capabilities on the military side. And the other thing you see going to all those countries is there's a huge spectrum of wealth isn't the right word. There's a huge spectrum of folks who are poverty stricken.
Yeah.
The world is just amazingly poor in some places.
Mm-hmm.
So when we were building this airfield in the Philippines, I said, we have to cut down some coconut trees. Well, coconut trees were this guy's, means of making a living. So we went to find the guy that owned the land where the airstrip was. And we are walking through a jungle to find where he lives. And we find a hut. I mean, this is a shack. With banana leaf roof and everything, and it's off the ground, maybe 18 inches. It's just a wooden platform, and that's where he lives. Mm-hmm. And so we go to meet him, and nice guy, no teeth, not healthy at all, and he's like, oh yeah, well, you got to talk to my ex-wife. So we then go to see his ex-wife, and we go down this dirt road, and we come on this compound, And she's like, hey, would you like some coffee? Have some of the best coffee. Beautiful home. But her ex-husband was perfectly fine. And many people there were just living on the dirt. And I saw that in Thailand.
Yeah.
I saw that there. I mean, the folks in Afghanistan, just unbelievably poor. And so you end up seeing what folks go, oh, and then the education level is often next to nothing. Or whatever the local village elders teach, that's the education.
Exactly.
And so it's very easy for them to be manipulated their entire life, even when it comes to things like the Quran. And I'm not knowledgeable enough to speak one way or another, but I did take an entire class on Islam so I could understand a little bit. And how are there so many different things in the Quran who seem to be contradictory. And so it was interesting. So you can really take something like that. I don't want to stick to the Islamic faith because there's other things. But essentially, whomever you're learning by, your parents, the village elders, whatever, it's that's your voice of authority. The other thing on the poverty side, it's amazing the level of technology some of these places have never been exposed to.
Yeah.
We're in Afghanistan. We got brand new trucks for the commandos. One day we went down there and every truck had dead batteries. We're trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And so as we dug into it more, we learned when the new trucks arrived and the soldiers who were being trained on them, they went down there. They were fascinated by the radio. Wow. And they turned the radio on. Mm-hmm. And then when they were done, it was interesting. They walked away. Mm-hmm. Lights on, radio on, no engine on.
Yeah.
So every truck had dead batteries because they didn't understand. Nobody, part of the teaching had to be, oh, by the way, you have to turn this thing off.
Yeah.
And the other, I'll tell you a kind of an odd one. We had real problems with plumbing in Afghanistan. Like, what is going on? They're just crushing this thing.
Yeah.
The septic system was just being destroyed. What's going on? Didn't know this. Well, where they came from, they don't use toilet paper. They use their left hand and they use stones. Mm. And that's what they were using, stones, and then throwing stones into the toilet.
Oh, jeez.
Which obviously doesn't go well with plumbing.
Yeah, no.
But that was one of the, so I mean, it's just the level of education, the poverty, was pretty amazing. How you can be manipulated or taught one way or another, and their perspective. We had a chance to meet with village elders, and I think we established a very good relationship. Mm-hmm. But before that, before we had an opportunity to go meet with them, I got some great photos. But they were, we were just the bad guys on the other side of the fence.
Yeah, exactly.
And so when you get a chance to talk and now you got a language barrier to overcome.
Yeah,
it's actually okay. When everyone's kind of focused on the same thing, making ends meet, having a family and all. But boy, it's crazy. I just had a great. It was a great experience. I've been all over the world. Europe, Africa, Asia. I've never been to South America, but pretty much everywhere else. And the military has kind of sent me all over there, to include, somewhere as, benign and friendly as Canada. Military sent me there. I did stuff up there. So, anyway.
No, kind of wanted to ask, okay, just real quick about Afghanistan. So,
sure.
Were you in, say, southern Afghanistan, like northern Afghanistan, were you near the border of Pakistan?
So my first tour, I mentioned I was in Kabul, or just south of Kabul. I'd call that sort of east central Afghanistan. Mm-hmm. I flew into Bagram Air Force Base, which is up north of Kabul. Mm-hmm. And then that convoy was the first exposure to what I thought was fly by the seat of your pants kind of operations. Yeah. I was disappointed in the level of, because I had gone through all this training and preparation, and then they were doing nothing of the sort with respect to how we were operating to get us down to, and we did fine. It wasn't a problem. But that's where I operated. I couldn't tell you how many miles. Well, we were closer to Pakistan there than than my other tour. My other tour was in Helmand Province.
I've heard of Helmand.
So Helmand Province was down in the southwest, and when I was down there, it was pretty neat. I think it was 9 locations, but I had 600 Marines spread over 9 different locations, to include a place called Bakwa. It's a real small town, kind of northwest. I was based out of Bastion, Leatherneck.
I've heard of that.
And then we had an airfield down south called Dwyer. I had Marines down there, and one up north called Delaram. There were actually 2 Delarams when we first got there. And then I had a forward operating base called Edinburgh, and I had Marines up there that were doing airfield. They were doing some food service. That was part of the mission then. They were actually doing food service, showers, and laundry for some Marine forces based out there, but also they were doing the aircraft refueling. So it was a FARP, a forward arming and refueling points. They could come in there and get stuff and go.
Oh, okay.
Rotary wing, though. So we're talking helicopters.
Yeah.
And MV-22 Ospreys and CH-53s. And I guess we had some skids come in there once in a while. Skids they're not on wheels, they're on these rails. So when you think of skids, think of the Huey and the Cobra.
Oh, okay.
For the Marine Corps, Huey and Cobra. Yeah. Those are kind of your attack helicopters.
Yeah.
And then I had ones all the way to the southeast. There was a big airfield, and I can't remember. And I literally had like 3 Marines there. That was it. They were, so I had them spread all over the place. I had an EOD team. I think I had 8 out of 9 EOD guys at a place called FOB Geronimo, which was out to the southeast, with 3rd Battalion, 3rd Marines, who was led by a good friend of mine. So I'd stop out there once in a while and see how things were going. But we had them spread all over the place, all throughout Helmand Province, to include, and you may have heard of this place called Sangin, a place called Sangin. That's a pretty dangerous place. But and Kanashin Castle, which was down south of Dwyer. But that was kind of the geography. We had it spread kind of all over there in support of those forces. There was a Marine regiment, Regimental Combat Team, they call it RCT. There was RCT 5, 5th Marines down south, RCT 2, 2nd Marines, that's called 2nd Marine Regiment. 5th Marines is out of Camp Pendleton. 2nd is out of Camp Lejeune. And those guys then had their battalions and companies spread all over the place. And then our job there was to provide various support, primarily to the air wing. And those guys, they're flying Harriers, F-18s, Ospreys, all these rotary wing I mentioned, mostly out of Bastion, Leatherneck, with a footprint, a permanent footprint down at Dwyer as well.
Yeah. So I guess the main center would have been in Kabul, but refueling, or if there's ever like a trouble with the aircraft,
Not Kabul, not for us.
Oh, really?
We did everything there. Yeah, we were down there completely in Helmand Province, and so everything took place there. Yeah, Kabul was too far away. Yeah, and I did fly in to Kabul. I think just once did I fly into Kabul, and I think I was on my first tour, but they call it Kia, Kabul International Airport. But that's a commercial airport.
Yeah. I mean, see what you were saying about even these villages surprises me, because I figured even with the British Empire and then the Soviet Union going in Afghanistan, that would have been more technology than that.
Oh my
you were
goodness.
Describing.
Well, think about this: I think the Soviets, I think it was late 70s,
79, 89.
Yeah, so okay, late 70s to late 80s. They were there for 10 years, and they were fought against the entire time. There's one called, and I haven't read it in years, but I wanted, I was reading it when I was in there, called The Bear Went Over the Mountain. That's about the USSR, going into Afghanistan. But they've got such a huge, rich history of being invaded and fighting and not ever being occupied that they've been at war probably since the 70s would be considered being at war, because after the Soviets left, Then there was the fight amongst themselves,
Yeah.
with the Taliban. So then the Taliban ran the country for years. Then the Taliban allowed all that training to go on that led to 9/11. Now we come in 2002, maybe even late 2001.
Yeah,
2001. So right after 9/11, we're going in there with that. There's that one great movie that talks about these guys coming in riding horses, and I know some guys that were on that. It was an incredible experience, an incredibly dangerous experience. But so this essentially, Afghanistan's kind of been in a state of, I'll say, conflict, probably more like war, for 40 years. So a lot of times, and I saw this when I was in Djibouti, Africa, when you get into some of these places, they call it a generational fight. Like, you may not be able to convince the old man, you may not be able to convince the MAMs, MAM, military-aged males, right? You may not be able to convince them, but if you can network and support the moms and the kids, it's possible if you're long enough and you're not abusing them. If they see more help than abuse, then over a course of a generation, we might be able to turn the tide. And that's kind of some of the theory of counterinsurgency warfare. Support the forces. I know that the Marine Corps, and I wasn't there, but the Marine Corps had the western part of Iraq, and I'm trying to remember the name of the province, but it was the Sunni. It was a Sunni area, and we got so knee deep and connected, and a friend of mine in there, Jerry, he's a Marine colonel, and he probably knows a little bit more about it from personal experience, but we got so knee deep to where, okay, now they were trusting us that we are there to help and to be part of the team, and that kind of turned that around.
Yeah, that's
Anbar province. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
Al Anbar. Yeah. So. Yeah.
Oh. I wanted to ask, while you were in the military, did you receive any special commendations, such as, I'm just giving examples, the Purple Heart, the Bronze Star, the Silver Star?
So I received the Bronze Star twice, but there is a difference. I want to let make it clear. So you can get many of the awards with a V, and that would be for valor. You can get things like a Navy Achievement Medal. So got like I have Navy Commendation Medal, Meritorious Service Medal. I've got Defense Meritorious Service Medal. I have the Distinguished Service Medal, and then I have 2 Bronze Stars. But I gotta find it. I think it's called. Boy, it's shame on me because I got it when I was retiring. I think it's the Distinguished Service. It's above the Bronze Star. And I can't believe I'm blanking on it, but I think it's Distinguished Service. That's pretty funny. I don't even think about this stuff anymore. But I have 2 Bronze Stars, which the criteria are, it's the equivalent. If it doesn't have a V, that's different. But it's equivalent of the Meritorious Service Medal, which is good. Navy Achievement, there'll be an Army Achievement, Commendation, Meritorious Service Medal. Equivalent to that is the Bronze Star. If it's V, then it's Bronze Star with V for Valor. That means you did something incredible in combat. Now you're getting into Bronze Star, Silver Star, Navy Cross, Medal of Honor, things like that. But for me, I have two Bronze Stars, one for each of those tours in Afghanistan. And for those, it still is considered like for, sort of meritorious or exceptional service. But the only way you can qualify is if a significant portion of your time was in combat and not just in combat, like, I live on this compound, that's where I live, that wouldn't count.
Yeah.
But you were out and about. And because for the first tour, I was continuously out and about between compounds. The second tour with the Marine Wing Support Squadron, the Sergeant Major and I, we had Marines everywhere, so we were constantly traveling. And we were constantly out. And then you'd go visit, like, my MPs who were up in Bakwa, and we'd go out on a short, little, hey, show us what you got going. We go out into town, walking and seeing what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
So those little nuances or exposure is what led to a qualification to be Bronze Star eligible, but I ended up getting 2 Bronze Stars.
Okay. Now, kind of just a technical question. When you have, because I'm curious about that personally, if you get 2 of the same medal, is it like, do you have 2 separate things, say, on your uniform, or is it there's some kind of special?
Yeah, there'll be
symbol?
designators on there, like typically a medal. If you have 2 of them, then you got a medal with a star on it.
Oh, okay.
And it'd be like a gold star on there, and then maybe you have 2 gold stars.
Mm-hmm.
When you get to where you have the one that's the original plus 5, then it's a silver star on there. So some of those are more like your deployment ribbons. You have a difference between medals and ribbons. So, yeah, they don't give you multiple, but it's a device is what they call it. It'd be a device on your ribbon that says, oh, okay, he's got more than one kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
So, yep.
Let me see. I have a few more questions.
I had just be clear. I had a great time in the military.
Yeah.
It's a fantastic career, and I deployed multiple times. Those are among the very best times, believe it or not. For a lot of guys, those are among the very worst of times. So I'm fortunate. I didn't I brought every Marine home. I had one Marine lose like half a finger over kind of more of an industrial accident than anything. I only had to send one back during deployment, and that was for a non-combat related thing. And I'm no sort of war hero. I went and did what was required, and had great Marines and sailors who worked for me. But it was a great career.
I think Scotty's about to show up at the door, by the way.
Okay.
I think I just saw him. Okay, so that actually answers a couple of my questions. So I kind of want to. Now you retired 2018. If my memory serves me right.
Yep.
Now, why did you choose to retire?
Well, so every rank has a service limitation. So if we see him, I'll give him the finger, meaning the 1 minute finger. Not the middle finger. But so that has me. I retired at 28 years and I guess 8 months. 28 years and 8 months. The most you can do as a colonel. So the most you can do like as a major is 20 years. As a lieutenant colonel was I think 27, might be 28. As a colonel, 30 years. So now you're just choosing. Hey, do I want another job? I was going to retire in 2014. They offered me a position down here, and I wanted to do the job, and I like this area, so I decided to stay.
Yeah, I remember around when you moved down here.
Yeah. So then when I'm coming up on, so if I had been selected to general, then you're kind of serving at the pleasure of the president.
Yeah.
Once you get 1 star. Well, do you have another orders for me? Yes or no? Okay, get out or don't.
And around that time, there could have been like a lot of volatility. Like the Obama administration come out, you didn't know what administration would be coming in at the time. And then, of course, that's the case now. So
you know what though? I wouldn't say that has a big impact.
Yeah.
I mean, it might have an impact on how you're equipped, how much money the forces get. But we are, I'm going to say, regardless of what the personal thoughts are, we are by design, and it is heavily enforced. You are apolitical.
Yeah.
You are, you don't have an elite. The allegiance is United States.
Yeah.
Whatever happens during your term, you are going to enforce. As you will execute these orders as if they were your own.
Yeah, because you've been every president since Reagan now.
I was not with Reagan. No, I was with. In fact, I failed. I wanted to get President George Bush Sr. He's not a senior, but I wanted to get him to sign my retirement paperwork, and I didn't reach out to him in time, and he passed away. So that was my. I think he passed away after, but I had plenty of time to do it. I wanted to have him sign it because he was the president who was president when I came in.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah. But yeah.
Now, let me see if I have any more. Now, I kind of wanted a few more. So, what was probably your favorite moment? This could be like something you're proud of, or something that was really funny while you were in the military, or both, even.
Hmm. That's a tough one.
Mm.
I don't know that I necessarily have a favorite moment. I'd say the most rewarding time was 2010, those 7 months in Afghanistan where I had
Mm-hmm.
Marines building, operating, securing runways, and doing
Yeah.
doing any number of missions all across the southwest Afghanistan. That was really
Mm-hmm.
challenging and rewarding. I had some great partners in crime. My sergeant major, my XO was here Friday.
Oh, really?
He came for a visit. He's now an airline pilot, but he was my executive officer for the unit. But that was probably the most rewarding uh, deployment. One that was not as rewarding, but was really a lot of fun, was that first deployment to Afghanistan, where I had this compound and this mixed force
Yeah.
of Army and Special Forces. It was just so interesting.
Yeah.
Because I was exposed to everything. To include, I went to meetings with the Minister of Defense.
Yeah.
There were times, I'm in the room talking to the Minister of Defense about how to establish a commando brigade. So they were setting up 6 commando Kandaks. Kandaks equal to a battalion. That's their word. And they wanted to set up a brigade headquarters. And we put together a plan and started training these guys. Most were generals. One was a colonel. And they were all candidates to become the next brigade commander. And it was really rewarding to see that. That was a lot of fun. And plus, we had such an interesting group from where we were. I went from let's see, I'm trying to think. I went from a pretty nice, warm place to one covered in snow, and then back to, melting and being a warm, high desert environment in one tour. I mean, we had, it was really interesting. And it was my understanding, and there's some stuff laid out there, is that the Taliban did some training at that compound. So there was some historical significance, and it was interesting to drive around or walk around and find these old buildings. It was all on the same compound, and old aircraft and train. So that was pretty neat. But I guess if you're talking about some funny times, and I'm honestly not sure if they still do this, but when you're on a ship, and I was on a ship for 7 months, but there's a thing called being a shellback. And so if you're a polywog, if you've never crossed the equator on a ship, and then you are a candidate to be a shellback, if you're going to cross, you have to go through a ceremony. And so this is the early 90s.
Yeah.
And it's probably not even allowed these days, but was a tremendous, I don't want to call it a hazing, but maybe a harassment. It was all in good fun, but I mean, you are, for probably 8 hours, you are running around the ship doing these different obstacles and tasks and being yelled at, and all to so that you end up with meeting, I think it was Neptune or whatever, this big sailor, and there were some different things you had to do to earn the title shellback. So that was it was a funny time with a lot of stuff going on. But yeah, there's a lot of great experiences, and yeah, it's hard to hone in on one thing, like one really great story for me.
No, this is more of a, is there something, if you could go back, would you change anything? Would you still not gone in the Marines? Would you served at all? Would you just stayed in the Marines and done something different?
I think I would have done this. When I came back from Afghanistan, I was very competitive for the rank of colonel, and I got selected to colonel. And I had just done 2 back-to-back deployments to to Afghanistan. So I was away from the kids a lot.
Yeah.
And that year I put in for command, but I wasn't all in. And you talk to any Marine, I don't know about the other services, there's a couple things you never do, and I did something that will that stops your career in its tracks. So anyway, I put in for command, but I didn't put all in, and I shouldn't have put in for command. I should have waived off 1 year, which is allowed. Well, I put in for command, and I was selected.
Mm-hmm.
But my family situation did not lend itself to moving again.
Yeah.
And doing another deployment away from the family at that time in my kids' lives could have been detrimental.
Mm-hmm.
So the good decision I made was I declined command.
Mm-hmm.
But that is the day that I not only burned a bridge, I flamethrower, I torched it.
Yeah.
There was no other chance of ever being promoted. There was no chance of anything. So the only thing I would do different is, I ran a career where I never burnt a bridge. And that day I did.
Mm-hmm.
My only mistake is not making that decision. That was a family decision.
Mm-hmm.
It was putting in that year for command.
Yeah.
I should have held off on that and then done the next year. Because the next year I did put in for command. But I didn't get selected and I wasn't an alternate.
Yeah.
And I asked about it. Because my request that following year was, just give me command. I don't care where it is. Anywhere around the world, I'm in.
Mm-hmm.
That's the way you got to be.
Yeah.
And by that point, it's like, hey man, you'll never get selected, man. You declined it last year.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, I knew that was the case, but so I never put in again. But that's the only thing I would do different. I actually the only other thing I would do is when I had a guy, he's called a career counselor, ask me when I was coming up for lieutenant colonel. They'll review your career and say, let me tell you how you how competitive you are or not. He said, what do you think your career shows? I said, I think I was an okay lieutenant. I think I was a decent captain, and that I'm better than my peers to a pretty good extent as a major. And he said to me, that's exactly what your report shows, exactly that. So my point in that is, really, this is probably my bigger thing I would do different. I would have embraced the entire thing from lieutenant on. I don't think I took it as seriously as a lieutenant as I should have and as I could have, because I don't think I considered it a career. I think I considered it as a stepping stone to something else, and I didn't embrace it the way I should have. That's what I would say. Of course, it didn't hurt me. I made it to colonel. There's only 600 colonels in the entire Marine Corps, so I didn't do terrible, but
exactly.
Yeah.
Now, I guess my final question is, now, are you still considered? I know some Marines, when they leave, they'll still technically be in the reserves. Are you in anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No, I'm on the retired rolls. It's not. Yeah. I mean, sometimes when you leave, like you do it, you're on the hook for 2 years in what's called an inactive ready reserve. I saw that Desert Storm. Guys who were out of shape, long hair, big beards, standing in line for a haircut. I'm like, what are you guys doing? Call back to active duty. Like, holy cow, are you kidding me? But no, that's not the case for me. And I don't think really I think retired officers might be recallable up to the 30-year mark, which I'm past now.
Yeah.
I don't know about the enlisted side. I used to know. It's like when I've lost the need to know, I've sort of lost the. I've forgotten some things. So, yeah.
Okay. I think that's all the questions I have.
Perfect.
So, what if you would like to, if you want to, if there's any, photographs, or I know you have that thing with your uniform and your medals upstairs. If I could take like some pictures of that, if it's okay.
Oh yeah. Yeah, you can do that.
Yeah.
Hey, here's one thing I'll say, Nolan. I've mentioned this in my retirement thing. So, how does a guy who plans on doing 4 years end up doing 29 years?
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah.
So, mine was all about opportunity. Every time there was a chance for me to get out, there was something interesting for me to do. And I said, I'll do that for a little longer. So I was a lieutenant at 1st Combat Engineer Battalion, coming up on the time to get out, and I put my name in the hat because it was a competitive process. I'd like to go on ship and go on a deployment. And I was selected. Well, that was taking me past my 4 years.
Yeah.
I came back. So while I was while I was on deployment, one, I was, and I knew this, I'd been selected for captain. I was selected to be a pilot, and I was selected to go to graduate school for environmental engineering. And the headquarters Marine Corps was mad, like, why did you apply for two different programs, pilot and graduate school? Like, well, I thought they were both a shot in the dark. I just got lucky. So anyway, I declined the pilot thing, and I went and did environmental. So I got a 2-year degree at an Air Force base and a master's degree in environmental engineering. And then I went to Albany, Georgia, and did 3.5 years of cleanup, environmental investigation and cleanup. Okay, so now that takes me to 10 years. Well, should I get out of 10 years? Well, I've just been selected a major now. So I told Laura, I said, hey, what do you think? If I get promoted to major, I'm due for orders, and they're going to send us to Okinawa, Japan. I said, and I'm not doing 13 years. We're either doing 10 or we're doing 20. She was all excited about going to Okinawa. I told the guy that gives you orders, I said, I don't care where you send me as long as it's an engineer battalion. He said, well, how about Okinawa? I said, I'm in. So I went there. So now while I was there, I was a company commander. I was operations officer with a deployment to the Philippines, and I was executive officer. Then I got selected to go to an Army command and staff school in Leavenworth, Kansas. I went there. Great experience. I did a joint tour. So now I'm coming up on getting close to 20 years. I got selected to be a CO of a Marine Wing Support Squadron, which at the time was 585 Marines. At the high water mark, I had 850 Marines with me, 600 in deployed, 250 here. So now that's going to take me from 19 years to 21 years. Well, shit, I was going to retire at 20. The night before my change of command, I got contacted by my boss, who's now a 2-star general, and he said, hey, Tony, welcome to the Senate. I'm like, sir, I don't even know what that means. He said, you've been selected to colonel. So, of course, I'm going to do colonel for 3 years. So I did that in Norfolk for 3 years. At the end of that, now it's 2014. Do I want to retire or not? Had an opportunity to come back down here to do this job. First, it was aviation ground support, sort of looking at the build and secure runways and operate runways, and then be the G4 logistics guy. I said, that sounds good. So I came here and did 4 years. So the final straw of when do you get out is, okay, I'm due for orders because I just did 4 years here. I only have 18 months left before 30. What are they going to do? They were going to send me down to Lejeune, which is, as you know, about an hour drive instead of 15-minute drive. I decided to retire. So that's how does a guy that plans 100% only to do 4 years, that was it, 4 years and done, do 29. That's how that happens. It's all about opportunity and something that's interesting. And it was always the case. Oh, and not to mention mentorship. The leaders I've been exposed to that trained me were just incredible. And I'm talking enlisted and officers, just great guys. My sergeant major was one of the most influential guys in my career, and I didn't meet him till I was lieutenant colonel. But just a great leader. So,
I should say here, we both live in New Bern, North Carolina. He's talking about MCAS Cherry Point.
So
okay.
But all right, well, good. Do you want? I don't have any pictures ready to pull up right away, but fine. I could. When's your report?
So the paper's not due until November 10th. So if you would like to show me any pictures, or you have plenty of time.
Man, I want to try to. I'll try to pull some up.
Okay.
I probably have
thank you. I appreciate that.
The November 10th is Marine Corps birthday.
Yeah, that's right. It is.
So there you go. Yeah. All right. Well, good. We're good to go?
Yes, sir.
All right. Time for another beer. All right. Thanks, Nolan.
Appreciate it.
All right.
Thank you.
Sure.